Today, in the Kingdom Classroom, we're still in our series on existential questions. And today, we are going after question number 3. What is wrong with the world? And I think today's lesson might be a little bit longer, so let's get started. Welcome back to the Kingdom Classroom. We're in a series on existential questions, questions related to our existence. Questions like, who am I? Or why am I here? Or how did I get here? And I think everyone has these questions, whether they say it or not. And so what we're doing in this series is we are looking at each question and then we're providing an answer to each of these questions from 2 differing perspectives. First, what answer does the world or the culture give? And then, how does the Bible, the Word of God, answer these questions? So far, we've discussed 2 existential questions. Who am I? A question of identity. And why am I here? A question of purpose. And we've explored these 2 questions from a cultural or worldly perspective and from a Christian or biblical perspective. Today, we'll discuss a 3rd existential question. What is wrong with the world? A question of brokenness. Now, you'd have to be living under a rock not to know that something is vitally broken in today's world. Let me give you a few news headlines as of this recording. Former corrections officer learns prison sentence for ordering inmate to perform sex acts. Teacher's aide placed on leave as school investigates alleged assault of boy with autism. Doctor charged with sexually abusing over a dozen patients. 3-year-old mauled to death by dogs. Now her father is facing charges. Man accused of breaking into ex-girlfriend's home, killing her. 13-year-old charged with murder of a 64-year-old woman. On top of that, rent is skyrocketing to the point that families have to choose between food and housing. I remember when neighbors came together and helped one another, when family meant support, acceptance, and never being left alone. If one family member fell on hard times, he always had somewhere to go for help. A family member would always take him in with no questions and no judgment. Now, family means you have the same parents, the same blood, and nothing else. Crime, poverty, and an overall indifference for life and humanity are at an all-time high, while love, kindness, and respect are at an all-time low. I would dare to say they're becoming extinct. People today will stop on the side of the road and pick up a stray dog or cat, take them to a shelter, or even take them to their homes and feed them, house them, nurse them back to health, and accept them as a part of their families. But these same people will pass by a human being made in the image of God, broken and battered by the circumstances of life, and they'll turn their heads away as if they don't see them and give them not a second thought, not even a kind word. What kind of world do we live in where the life of an animal is more important than the life of an image bearer? We live in a me, me, me world. Every man for himself. Why? What happened? It hasn't always been this way. What went wrong? And as I looked into this question from a cultural perspective, it honestly made my head hurt. There's so many views on what's wrong with the world. And I actually agree with some of them to a point. And others, I just looked at and I shook my head. And I wondered, does this even make sense to you? But in fairness, I'll present their perspectives here. I can't present them all, but I will summarize them. All the cultural views begin with the same premise. that humans are inherently good and something external has caused a decline in the world. The first group believes that the problem with the world is human nature, but they're quick to add it's not our fault. Humans are inherently good, but society has corrupted us. Society imposes rules and brings on competition and vanity. And it makes people more concerned with their reputation, their wealth, and their status than with their natural goodness. So humans are inherently good, and the bad things humans do is not their fault. It's society's fault. The second group of thinkers believes that the moral decline from our naturally good human nature is the fault of economic inequality and unchecked capitalism, which, they argue, leads to poverty, exploitation, and social division. This view argues capitalism naturally concentrates wealth among the elite, creating an unfair system where the rich get richer and the poor struggle. And as the rich get richer and the poor continue to struggle, feelings of injustice and resentment grow. People who feel excluded from economic opportunities or who see no path to growth, to moving up out of their poverty, they might turn to crime. When wages are stagnant and job opportunities disappear, they say, many people, especially people in disadvantaged communities, turn to crime out of necessity. And another outcome of this disparity in our communities is weaker social cohesion. Not only do people feel disconnected from society at large, people begin to feel disconnected from their own families. The mentality becomes, how can I help you if I'm struggling just as much or more? Now, I don't disagree that there's economic inequality and unchecked capitalism. I don't disagree. And I don't disagree that in our current economic environment, the rich do get richer and the poor do struggle. But what I do disagree with is the premise that all who struggle economically turn to crime. But I'll revisit that a little later. Yet another group believes that systemic oppression and social injustice are the leading contributors to what's wrong with the world. They believe that systemic oppression and social injustice create economic, political, and social barriers that keep people, especially people in marginalized communities, from accessing equal opportunities. These conditions, they say, increase crime and violence because people are desperate and they're resentful and they're disadvantaged. And many scholars, activists, and political thinkers argue that oppression and injustice push individuals and communities towards crime as a survival mechanism, a form of protest, or a consequence of social breakdown. These arguments suggest that, but for societal greed, economic inequality, unchecked capitalism, systemic oppression, and social injustice, the world would be a peaceful, harmonious place where everyone gets along and nothing negative would ever happen. If not for economic inequality, doctors, who are among the wealthiest in society, by the way, wouldn't sexually abuse their patients. If not for systemic oppression, there would be no need for correctional institutions because there would be no crime, and therefore corrections officers wouldn't force inmates to perform sex acts. If not for social injustice, teachers and teachers' aides wouldn't abuse autistic children. If not for unchecked capitalism, babies would never be mauled to death by dogs, and fathers wouldn't be arrested for keeping dangerous dogs around their babies. And surely, if there were no societal greed, teenagers wouldn't kill old ladies, and men would never kill ex-girlfriends. Yes, I am being facetious, because none of these issues were the cause of the headlines I read earlier. And don't get me wrong, as I said before, I agree that these things do exist. There is economic inequality. There is unchecked capitalism. There is systemic oppression and social injustice. But I totally disagree that these things are the cause of the problem with humanity. In fact, I would argue that these things are a further result of the problem with the world, not the cause. What's wrong with the world is not external, it's internal. In the early 1900s, the Times reportedly asked prominent intellectuals and writers this very same question: what is wrong with the world today? And G.K. Chesterton, a British writer, journalist, philosopher, and Christian apologist, allegedly responded to the question, "Dear sirs, I am yours sincerely, G.K. Chesterton." Modern and historic philosophers and activists place the blame squarely on the shoulders of society, an external source. But G.K. Chesterton and the Bible place the blame squarely on the shoulders of mankind, specifically the heart of man, an internal source. From a biblical perspective, we said the question, "Who am I?" is answered, "I am by creation an image bearer of God. And if I have received Christ and believed on his name, I'm a child of God." We said the answer to the question, "Why am I here?" is answered, to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. So with these answers in mind, we answer this third question: what is wrong with the world? God created us in his image, and he created us to glorify him and to enjoy him forever. He also created us with free will, because who wants forced love? He allows us to choose him or to reject him. And with those choices come consequences. What is wrong with the world? We are reaping the consequences of our choices. Our decision to sin and rebel against God. The world is broken because it is separated from God's will. Adam and Eve chose their will over God's will. They made the choice to disobey God. And as a consequence of this choice, sin, suffering, and death entered the world. God created humanity, and humanity has rejected him. Let's take a walk. Romans chapter 5, verse 12. Sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin. And in this way, death came to all people because all sinned. Isaiah 53, verse 6. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. These two verses tell us the universal nature of mankind's rejection of God. Isaiah says we all. Romans says all sinned. It's universal, the rejection of God. Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 9 and 10 says, "The heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart. I test the mind, even to give to each man according to his ways, according to the results of his deeds." We are reaping the consequences of our choices. God says that I will give to each man according to his ways. We are getting according to our ways. Let's keep walking. Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 21. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Paul argues that God has made himself known through creation, yet people suppress the truth and refuse to acknowledge him. Instead of worshiping the creator, people turn to idolatry, worshiping themselves or material wealth and possessions, or even other people. Let's keep walking. Romans chapter 1, verses 28 through 32. This gives us the consequences of rejecting God. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. And although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them. This list is our daily headlines: murder, deceit, gossip, slander. These are consequences of rejecting God. Ephesians chapter 4, we still walking. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 17 through 19. So this I say, and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer, just as the Gentiles also walk, in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God, because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. And they, having become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality, for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. Paul explains here that rejecting God leads to ignorance, a hardened heart, and moral corruption. The more people turn away from God, the more they embrace sinful desires and lose all sensitivity to right and wrong. And finally, Romans chapter 3, verses 10 through 18 describes the problem with the world as if it were written today. There is none righteous, not even one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together, they have become useless. There is none who does good. There is not even one. Their throat is an open grave. With their tongues, they keep deceiving. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their paths, and the path of peace they have not known. There's no fear of God before their eyes. Existential question number 3. What is wrong with the world? The answer is really simple. What's wrong with the world is us. God created a perfect world without sin or defect. Animals weren't mauling people. Adam wasn't abusing Eve. There were no earthquakes or tsunamis or hurricanes. There was no crime, no poverty, no social injustice, no economic inequality. These things didn't exist because sin didn't exist. Mankind chose to rebel against God, to reject God, and follow his own sinful desires. And while it seems that we're ending today's lesson on a sad, sorrowful, bad note, be encouraged. In our next lesson, we'll discover how what's wrong with the world can be made right. You don't want to miss it as we conclude our series on existential questions. As always, I am so grateful that you chose to join me today in the Kingdom Classroom. And I hope you're being helped by the content of these lessons. If you are, and if you know somebody else who could benefit from what the Lord is teaching us here, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, stay rooted in faith, walk in truth, and live for God's glory.